I wrote for the Joe Weider's bodybuilding magazines from the early 1980s to the late 1990s. I wrote mainly for Joe Weider's Muscle and Fitness magazine, which at the time was by far the leading bodybuilding magazine in the world. I also wrote for Joe Weider's Flex magazine, and very rarely I wrote for Joe Weider's Men's Fitness magazine, but I wrote almost exclusively for Muscle and Fitness in the first couple of years that I worked for Joe. And then later on, towards the end, I wrote mainly for Flex magazine. My titles were I was the science editor of Muscle and Fitness magazine for over 10 years. And I was my title for Flex magazine was editor at large. Editor at large meant that I didn't actually work out of the Weider office, but rather I worked out of my home and I submitted my articles. So they called me editor at large on the masthead, on the magazine masthead. And many of my articles, Joe Weider would always ask me. Oh, I also had one other title, by the way. After a couple of years of writing for Joe's Muscle and Fitness, I noticed under my byline in the magazine, under my name, that it would say member, Weider Research Clinic. And I always wondered who appointed me to the Weider Research Clinic. Joe Weider himself never mentioned my honorary appointment to the Weider Research Clinic. And when I asked somebody who also wrote for the Weider magazines, when I asked them where did the what was the Weider Research Clinic and where did it meet, he told me it met in a broom closet on the second floor of the Weider building in Woodland Hills. I think he was, so that's the Weider Research Clinic. But anyway, one thing that Joe would often ask me is when I wrote my articles, and I wrote many articles about the elite bodybuilders in the 80s and 90s. I wrote for the first two issues of Flex magazine, the very first two issues back in 1982. But Joe would often ask me in my articles when I interviewed the champions, as he called them, meaning the top bodybuilders, when I interviewed them about their training techniques, he asked me to always write their training techniques or list them as Weider training principles. With the Weider training principles, anyone who has read the Weider magazines is familiar with that expression, Weider training principles. These are a number of training principles that Joe took credit from. Now, the question is are these, first of all, did Joe actually develop these training principles? The answer is no. What he did is he simply kidnapped them. He attached his name to them. That's the first thing. Where did he get the idea for these training principles? Well, he got the idea from articles in his own magazine. When others, including myself and many others, would interview top bodybuilders, if they trained in a particular manner or used certain specific techniques, Joe would then adopt these techniques, call them a Weider training principle. That's how the Weider training principles were developed. Now, the question that remained is, it's kind of humorous that Joe would kind of hijack these long-standing training methods and principles that have been used by bodybuilders since time immemorial, probably going back to Eugene Sandow in the 1890s, before Joe was even born in 1921. But in any case, the question arises, is there any science behind the Weider training principles? In other words, do they actually work? Well, let's go down a list of the Weider training principles, and I'll give you my opinion whether there's any scientific basis. First, let's talk about program design. A Weider training principle he calls the Weider cycle training principle. Now, this basically involves dividing your training year into different phases or periods where different aspects of bodybuilding are emphasized, such as building strength, building muscle mass, increasing muscular definition, or that type of thing. The idea behind the cycle training was to reduce injuries and also to keep the training fresh by not constantly training heavy and all that. All right, the truth of the matter is that the real name for this is periodization training. Periodization training was actually developed by Russian and East German sports scientists, and of course Joe adopted it and called it cycle training. I was going to do an article on periodization training for my Applied Metabolics publication. Uh, a lot of people espouse it. A lot of people say it's the best way for natural bodybuilders to train because it prevents overtraining and injuries. However, when I did the extensive research that examined the effects of periodization training versus traditional resistance training, I wasn't impressed. To be honest with you, I wasn't impressed at all. For one thing, bodybuilders have been using a form of periodization training or cycle training for many years. For example, training with heavy weights in one workout, training with moderate weights in the next workout, training with light weights in the third workout, and then cycling it over and over again. This is a form of periodization called undulating periodization. And I use that system myself many times over the last 60 years. It's nothing new. That's been out even before the Russian and German scientists came out with standardized periodization. So periodization is a real thing. There is some science based. It's based on Hans-Selye general adoption syndrome of stress, which basically says that if you apply a certain amount of stress, the body will adapt to the stress by making certain changes. However, if you continue to apply the stress without giving the body a chance to adapt to it, disease results. In the case of training, that would be overtraining and lack of progress. Unfortunately, the entire periodization model is based on the Selye stress theory, but it doesn't really match the Selye stress theory. So you could say that cycle training is semi-based on science, but there is some scientific background. The next Weider principle for program design is called eclectic training. That involves basically doing various types of sets, reps, and exercise. You should include both, let's say, multi-joint exercise movements, large muscle groups such as barbell squats, bent over rows, this type of thing, which involves large muscles and accessory muscles. And you should also include isolation exercises, also known as single joint exercises. Now, there is science to that. Basically, what's usually prescribed is for you to do your multi-joint or large muscle exercises like squats early in the workout routine when you have the most energy, because large multi-joint exercises require the greatest amount of energy. Single joint exercise, such as curls and tricep extensions, they involve less energy. They can be done towards the end of the workout. A lot of people do a push-pull split routine where they do, for example, back and biceps. It's always best to do the back first because the back requires a lot. The back training does involve biceps, but working the back utilizes a lot more muscle mass than just training the biceps. And if you were to train your biceps before you train your back workout would be considerably less effective because you've greatly fatigued your biceps by training them first. So eclectic training has a basis in science and makes sense. It's true. Instinctive training. This is one of Joe's favorite training principles. Instinctive training basically means training how you feel like. In other words, if, for example, you go to the gym and let's say you normally do, 12 sets of biceps, but for some reason when you get to the gym that day, you don't have a lot of energy. You don't feel like you want to do 12 sets of biceps. So you go by your instinct, you train your biceps, but you do, instead of 12 sets, 6 sets. Let's say you go to the gym and it goes for any muscle. In other words, instinctive training refers to training how you feel. Unfortunately, it can be taken out of context and it could lead to something where you change your workout every time you train. In other words, you might train biceps 3 days in a row because you feel like training biceps. That is unscientific, and that is not good because you're not giving enough recovery time for the muscle to recover. That is not going. You're not going to make any gains training that way. So instinctive training makes scientific sense up to a point. In other words, if you shouldn't force yourself to do something that, let's say, you don't feel like, maybe you don't feel good, you don't have the energy. There's nothing wrong with altering your workout If you want to call it instinctive training, call it whatever you want, but that makes sense from a scientific point of view. Muscle confusion. This is kind of related to instinctive training. This is another one that Joe used to ask me to always put in the articles. Muscle confusion means constantly changing your workout, number of sets, number of reps, exercises, the order of the exercises, how long you rest between sets. The principle behind muscle confusion, or Joe Weider's muscle confusion training principle, was that it would prevent you from getting into a rut and reducing your muscle gains. This makes no sense. This is one of Joe's principles that was basically senseless. Now, the only reason to really change your workout, whether it's a single exercise or an entire muscle group, is more for psychological reasons rather than physiological, physical reasons. While it's good to do a variety of exercise to hit a muscle from different angles, because that probably will give you more complete muscle development, the idea that you need to change your exercises from workout to workout, it doesn't give your body a chance to adapt to the exercise, and you're actually working against yourself. So muscle confusion, as stated by the Joe Weider muscle confusion training principle, is not scientifically based, and makes no sense. That is not a scientifically based. Then you have the Weider principle of continuous muscle tension. That means that when you do the exercise, you don't, in other words, let's say you're doing a curl, you do a continuous motion. You don't stop at the bottom, you don't stop at the top. Continuous motion. This increases something called time under tension of the trained muscle. Time under tension is a proven way to increase muscular hypertrophy or growth. In fact, they've showed that if you, let's say you use a moderate to lightweight and you do an exercise with continuous tension, meaning not stopping at the top or the bottom, controlling the weight. In other words, about 2 seconds to raise it, 4 seconds to lower it, but no pausing. In other words, you do the complete movement. You can actually get the same benefits as occlusion training, where, in other words, where they put a cuff on the muscle, and basically that occludes the blood flow. It increases metabolic stress within the muscle. The metabolic stress causes the production of certain muscle fatigue byproducts that are known to stimulate anabolic pathways in muscle and possibly stimulate muscle growth. In fact, metabolic stress is considered one of the 3 pillars of muscular hypertrophy, with the other being mechanical tension and muscle damage. So continuous tension, it makes total sense. It's definitely scientifically based. Flushing training. Flushing training it kind of ties into bodybuilders' love of getting a muscle pump. But flushing training involves training a body part with multiple exercises. Let's say you do 3 or 4 exercises before you train another muscle. That's just basic common training. That does make scientific sense, but there's nothing special to it. Bodybuilders have been doing that for over 100 years. Holistic training, that's using numerous training techniques such as low and high reps, faster and slower speeds, alternate exercise to stimulate maximal muscle fibers. This again relates to what I was saying about alternating heavyweight, lightweight, high reps, low reps. That does make scientific sense, because if you do higher reps, to failure, for example, let's say 20, 25 reps, you're working the type 1 muscle fibers, also known as the endurance fibers. For years, scientists believed that the type 1 fibers, this is what gives you muscular endurance, they weren't capable of much muscle growth. In recent years, that notion has been changed. Type 1 fibers are subject to muscle hypertrophy or growth, not as much as the type 2 fibers. You hit the type 2 fibers mainly with moderate to heavy weights. So doing both types of training, let's say moderate to lightweight, higher reps, heavier weight with lower reps. When I say lower reps, I mean maybe 6 to 8, no higher than that, with let's say 70 to 80% of maximum 1 rep weight. That will get both types of muscle fibers, and it will lead to better muscle growth. So Joe Weider, as he calls it, the holistic training principle does make scientific sense. Isolation training basically is where you that's related to single joint exercises, or where you basically do focus on a single muscle at a time, like concentration curls for bicep, tricep extensions for tricep, that type of thing. That does make sense. It definitely helps increase muscle hypertrophy. Tricep press downs, example of isolation training. So that makes sense. There is scientific sense to that. Isotension, that's basically a kind of an alternate way of doing the old Charles Atlas system, where you basically hold and flex your muscles for anywhere from 6 to 10 seconds. You could apply resistance, your own body resistance to the muscles. And this actually does help muscle hypertrophy. And it's a good way to keep your muscles in shape if for some reason you can't get to the gym or something like that. When you do the isotension, you don't just keep the muscle in one position. You actually keep the tension throughout a full range of motion. If you kept it in one position, that's an isometric contraction. And if you did only isometric contractions, the muscle will get stronger only in the position of the isometric contraction. If you do a full range, you get the entire range of motion for that muscle gets stronger. So isotension does have a scientific basis. Muscle priority means hitting your weakest muscle first. That definitely makes scientific sense. Now, I'll give you an example of myself. A lot of people, when they train their legs, they do their thigh muscles first, their quads, maybe their hamstrings, and then they train their calves afterwards. Now, normally, you would train the largest muscles first. It would make sense to train the thighs before the calves. However, ever since I began training, I've noticed that training my thighs takes so much energy, and they take so much of my muscle intensity, whatever you want to call it, that if I train my thighs before I train my calf workouts are terrible. I literally can't even feel that my calves working. So if you think that you need better calf development, you'd be better off training your calves before your thighs. That's muscle priority. Makes sense scientifically. Peak contraction basically is, let's say you're doing a curl. What you're going to do is at the top of the exercise, you're going to hold the weight for maybe 2 or 3 seconds before lowering it. You actually involve the greatest number of muscle fibers at the peak contraction point. The Nautilus exercise machines were actually designed, they had a special cam that put the most amount of exercise stress at the peak contraction portion of each repetition. So peak contraction definitely makes scientific sense. Progressive overload is one of the most time-honored scientific principles of training. It's absolutely essential if you want to make gains in muscle size. You have to train progressively. You have to add either a little bit of weight, maybe 1 or 2 extra reps, maybe cut your rest down between sets. You have to always constantly produce increased stress on the muscle. If you do the same weight, same reps all the time, your body will be in a homeostasis state where it'll stay the same. You'll be able to retain your muscle just by merely exercising, but you're not gonna make muscle gains unless you increase the stress on the muscle or the overload. So progressive overload is the most scientifically proven of all, if you want to call it, Weider principles that exist. Pyramid training means basically to start out, let's say, with a lightweight. Let's say you do a lightweight warm-up, and then each set you gradually increase the weight until you're at your maximum weight. Depending on what you want to do, it could be heavier, maybe 80% of 1 rep max. You'll be able to do 6 reps. Moderate weight would be 8 to 10 reps. And then some people do a reverse pyramid where they'll start out with the heavier weight, and with each set they go lighter. That's pyramid training. That does make sense. Big advocate of pyramid training was the first Mr. Olympia, Larry Scott. He used to do something called down the rack. Let's say he did side laterals with dumbbells. He would start out with, let's say, heavier weights with the dumbbell side laterals, a heavy weight, then he'd go immediately without stopping. He'd put the weights back on the rack, go to the next weight, which is lighter, then the next weight, the next weight, the next weight, until he completed about 6 sets. He'd do that non-stop. That's pyramid training. And it does have a scientific basis. It makes sense. It's an advanced principle. It can help you get out of a training rut. That definitely has. The Weider superset principle, again, supersets have been around for about 100 years at least. It involves doing 2 sets for the same but different muscle groups back to back with no rest between. When I train my arms, I always superset bicep and tricep. Arnold Schwarzenegger did that. Sergio Oliva did, some of the great bodybuilders in the past. It makes the workout go a lot faster because you're doing like a 2-for-1. Instead of doing triceps alone, you're alternating with bicep. Makes the workout go a lot faster. Plus, you get a fantastic pump. Gives you a great, much greater muscle pump than doing triceps alone or biceps alone. A favorite technique of Arnold when he was training for contests was to superset chest with back. He would do, for example, bench presses, and then he'd go immediately doing chins and back and forth until he completed about 5 or 6 sets. Those are supersets. Trisets are doing 3 exercises. Instead of 2 exercises, you do 3 consecutive exercises for one muscle group. Again, it's a way of increasing muscle intensity and muscle pump, increase muscle blood flow, makes sense scientifically. Then you can go on to eat what they call Weider giant sets. That involves doing 4 or more exercises for muscle group. Now, when you're up to 4 sets, now you're doing something called cycle training, where you're basically doing 4 exercises at once without rest. It actually gets your heart rate up, and you can get a great moderate intensity aerobic workout. Not as good as doing straight aerobic training, but it's a pretty good way of getting the best of both worlds: an aerobic training with a traditional resistance training. Unfortunately, the giant sets, a lot of times by the time you get to the 4th exercises, if you really train with any level of intensity, your muscle will be kind of fatigued. You're not going to get much out of that 4th exercise because it's a little bit too much on the muscle, especially smaller muscles like the biceps and triceps. Burns is the Weider burn training principle involves continuing a set past the point of failure, where you do, let's say, partial reps. Let's say you've done 6 reps again in a bicep curl, and you can't do any more. You do short little reps, so you go past the point of fatigue. Again, that was a favorite technique of Larry Scott when he did the preacher bench curls. He would do 6 reps and finish off with about 6 burns. Larry had one of the best developed biceps in the history of bodybuilding. Burns does definitely make sense. And not only that, but they discovered, and recent research shows, that if you do partial reps when the muscle is at full extension, meaning let's say I'm holding a weight, the bottom portion of the repetition right here with the arm extended, if you do partial reps like that, you can actually gain as much muscle as doing full reps all the way. So burns makes sense. Cheating is a little controversial. The Weider cheating principle, basically when you've completed, let's say, again, I'm going to keep using curls. It's easiest exercise to picture. Let's say you've done a set of let's say 8 strict reps of barbell curls. What you do, and you can't do any more complete reps. So what you do is use a little bit of body weight to throw the weight up. In other words, use a little body language to get the weight going up. But what you do is you control the weight going down. You don't throw it up and throw it down. You throw it up a little bit using body movement, but you control the weight going down. That is okay to do, but you got to be careful because there's a tendency to use too much body movement where you're literally throwing the weight up. You always have to control the weight. If you're throwing the weight up, it's useless. It can actually just cause injuries. So cheating is a semi-scientific principle. Descending or drop sets. Let's say you do a complete set. Again, let's say you do 8 reps. What you do with a certain amount of weight. What you do is you remove a little bit of the weight, do more reps. Remove a little bit more weight, do more reps, and do that until you literally can't even lift the weight. Descending or drop sets. The studies that have looked at that have shown that they actually don't give you any more benefit than doing traditional straight sets. That's what the exercise science literature says. However, in my personal experience and that of many others, drop sets to me is a great intensity training technique. I think it definitely does promote muscle gains. So it's, again, semi-scientific principle. Force reps, again, let's say you've done 6 reps, can't do any more. You have a training partner help you or assist you in getting the weight up. Now, the danger here, and this I've seen this a lot, is let's say you're doing bench presses and you've done 6 reps and your training partner helps you with the force reps. A lot of times the training partner will be lifting the weight too much where you're really not doing anything. In other words, the proper way to give force reps is to give just enough help to allow you to do the exercise yourself. If the person gives you too much assistance, it's a waste of time. You're just it doesn't do anything. Negatives, also known as eccentric contractions, very scientifically based principle. Basically, it's controlling the weight on the way down. You could lift about 25% heavier weight on the way down. Most muscle soreness comes from eccentric or negative reps because they place more stress on individual muscle fibers. A lot of studies show that, however, you can build more muscle strength and actually more muscle size by doing negative reps. You should always control the weight on the way down. Take about 4 seconds to lower it, 2 seconds to raise it, 4 seconds to lower it. Partial reps, again, that's not too bad. That's scientific. I mentioned that earlier. If you do a partial rep in full extension, some studies show it's as good for developing muscle as full reps. Pre-exhaustion, Joe Weider stole this from Arthur Jones from Nautilus. Basically, you do an isolation exercise before a multi-joint exercise. For example, you would do side laterals for deltoid or shoulder muscle before you do a press exercise. That supposedly pre-exhausts the deltoid muscle. So when you do the press exercise, rather than have a lot of the emphasis go on the tricep muscle, because you pre-exhaust the deltoid muscle with side laterals, now the deltoids will be more involved in the exercise. Pre-exhaustion definitely makes scientific sense. Rest pause is where you lift a weight, you're doing an exercise, and let's say to get more reps out of the set, let's say you've done 6 reps, but then what you do is you lower the weight, you rest for about a couple of seconds, maybe 20 seconds, and then you lift it more. Lower the weight, rest another 20 seconds, and do another 2 to 3 reps. This rest pause, again, it's a high intensity technique, and again, some studies show that does actually help to build muscle. So that's about it for the Weider training principles. Joe Weider humorously attached his name, took credit for them. The truth is, as I said, he didn't really develop any of these principles. A lot of them were around before Joe was even born, but they are time-honored and time-tested. Most of these principles work, and they are an integral part of every successful bodybuilder's workout routine. So that's about it for the Weider principles. In case you're wondering, by the way, even though I wrote for the with the Weider magazines for many years, I have not myself looked at the Weider magazines. After I stopped writing for the Weider magazines in the late 90s, they used to send me copies, gave me a free subscription to Muscle and Fitness and Flex. This continued for maybe a year or two after the Weider magazines were first sold to David Pecker's organization. As soon as Pecker took over, they cut my subscription off, and that's when I stopped looking at Muscle and Fitness. That's a long time ago. We're talking well over 20 years ago. That's when I stopped looking at Muscle and Fitness and Flex magazines. Quite honestly, I don't even know. Maybe somebody could leave a comment. I don't even know if Muscle and Fitness or Flex I understand Flex is now a digital magazine. There's no longer a print edition. Somebody says that I think I've seen Muscle and Fitness on a newsstand. It's a lot thinner than it was when I wrote for it, because it costs a lot of money now to publish a print magazine. However, about 5 years ago, I think it was, I did see a Muscle and Fitness in a library in the magazine section, and I looked at it, and I was appalled at the quality of the articles. They were just seriously the worst articles I think I've ever seen in all the years they've been in bodybuilding. The magazine still had a nice physical appearance, very thin, but the articles were terrible, terrible, awful. They were inaccurate, awful. And then I did a little checking and I found the reason. Whoever owns the Weider magazines apparently takes voluntary articles. In other words, they don't pay writers for the articles. And let me tell you something. Here's a little factoid for you to know. No professional writer would ever write for free. The people that would write for free are not professional writers, and their work reflects that lack of professionalism. So I'll just leave it at that. So if you really want good writing and you really want good information, subscribe to my Applied Metabolics publication. It entails over 60 years of my constant study and knowledge and experience. I cover nutrition, exercise science, anti-aging research, effective fat loss techniques, supplement science, which supplements work, which ones don't, women's health and fitness, ergogenic aids. All of that is covered in Applied Metabolics. Extremely in-depth articles, not the superficial crap that I saw in those current Weider magazines, which were just a joke. Oh, horrible. I mean, seriously, I don't want to keep going into this, but they were obscenely bad. But I've been writing, for close to over 40 years. I know how to write for the public. Applied Metabolics is written in a clear, concise magazine style. You'll be able to understand every word, and you'll be able to profit from it. It's all practical, useful information that you can use right away. It'll save you a lot of time and prevent you from making a lot of the mistakes I made in the course of my bodybuilding training over the years. So subscribe today. It's www.appliedmetabolics.com. When you subscribe, send me an email and I'll send you an invitation to join my private Applied Metabolics Facebook page, where each day I post brand new information on exercise, nutrition, and general health. I have an email portal on my Applied Metabolics webpage where current subscribers only. I don't accept unsolicited questions. Current subscribers only can send me short questions about anything they read in Applied Metabolics or anything that comes to mind related to nutrition, exercise science, and I will answer their question as a appreciation and as a bonus of their subscription to Applied Metabolics. So I think that's about it. So if you want to have a best friend you'll ever have, go to your local shelter and adopt a dog. I just want to say one more thing about the magazines. I had a great time writing for the magazines. Writing for Weider, I was able to go all over the world, met a lot of great people. I knew every top bodybuilder of the era between the 80s and 90s. I knew them all. Most of them were great people. Some of them I'm still friendly with to this day. It was a great time. And I will say, remember, when I wrote for the magazines, the internet didn't exist. The magazines were probably the primary source of information. And I will say, we go back even further. You had great writers like Rick Wayne and several others. Great photography, Bill Dobbins. But the magazines in the era that I wrote were really good, if I say so myself. Yeah, they were commercialized because, it's a business. Joe Weider's out to make money. Come on, let's face it. But the information in the articles was rock solid. It was really good. Great stuff. And I'm a little saddened by the fact that era is gone and probably will never return again. And what you have today is all the crap and nonsense on the internet. Inaccurate, nonsensical. Anybody could write anything and post it on the internet, either in a blog, a video, or an article. It's kind of sad that this is the situation because it leads many astray where they make many mistakes and they don't make any gains and they wind up quitting training. It's kind of pathetic. So I just wanted to say that. If you want to have the best friend you'll ever have, go to your local shelter, adopt a dog. And by the way, don't take my word for it. If you ever get a chance to look at some of the magazines from the 80s and 90s, check out the articles and you'll see the veracity of what I just said. Take care. Thank you for listening.